Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So the recording has begun. Hello and welcome to today's panel discussion addressing the children's mental health crisis. My name is Crystal Reynolds and I am the Director of Marketing here at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. Thank you all for being here. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the events of yesterday's shooting in Texas and how, as caregivers, parents, clinicians, and community members, we may experience different levels of grief, fear, bewilderment, or anger. While this panel today was created to provide expert guidance on how COVID-19 has impacted our youth, we do recognize that separating from yesterday's events may be impossible. While we are not covering that topic today, we want to acknowledge the feelings related to this traumatic event and that this discussion may be triggering. So this panel is recorded. If you need to step out or take breaks in order to take care of yourself, please do so. So now I would like to introduce our panel of clinicians. Today we are joined by first Dr. Ariel Horovitz, who is a clinical psychologist on the cognitive behavioral therapy team at the Family Institute. Dr. Horovitz's background includes working with children, teens, families, and parents. She also has experience consulting with teachers, schools, and early intervention therapists, along with experience in working with individuals who have symptoms of anxiety, depression, familial discord, and emotional dysregulation. Welcome, Ariel. Next, we are joined by Jocelyn McDonnell, also a therapist on the cognitive behavioral therapy team at the Family Institute. In her practice, Ms. McDonnell specializes in the use of CBT and exposure and response prevention and enjoys helping clients explore how their thoughts, behaviors, and feelings are interconnected. She especially values working with OCD and anxiety disorders in children, adolescents, and adult populations. Believing there is no one-size-fits-all approach to therapy, Ms. McDonnell is passionate about providing a comfortable therapeutic space that will best facilitate the collaborative therapeutic alliance. Welcome, Jocelyn. And finally, we are also joined by Alejandra, who is a therapist in our child and adolescent practice at the Family Institute. Alejandra's expertise is embedded in her ability to blend academic research into her clients' real-life experiences. She has a unique approach to therapy, believing in the best in people and working closely with her clients to gently guide them into unraveling and mending the core of their issues. She has lived in multicultural environments, allowing her to work with a variety of cultural backgrounds and master how to approach diverse cases. Welcome, Alejandra. So to start the discussion, we'd like to address some of the missed opportunities that our children, or the opportunities that our children may have missed to develop age-appropriate social skills. So over the past few years, we know that many children have missed or have had delays in these development of those age-appropriate social skills as they've spent this important time and short span of life in isolation or on Zoom or away from their friends. Can each of you provide your perspective on these missed opportunities among the varying age groups that you work with and how they can transition out of this? So Ariel, we will start with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the introduction, Crystal. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to be focusing on middle school age children. So we're thinking 6th to 8th grade. Which is a bit of a smaller span of time compared to what Jocelyn and Alejandra will be focused on. However, this time is really a pure transitional time. So middle school age children, and again, 6th through 8th, whether they're going to a new school for middle school or they have an elementary school that continues onward, are kind of in this situational between worlds. Oftentimes they're trying on aspects of adolescent identity as well as still holding on to some childhood identity aspects. And we may see the start of the natural progression of wanting to connect with peers a bit more, or even some over-reliance on parents to process and figure out what's going on. So typically when we're thinking about 6th to 8th grade, opportunities that pre-COVID we thought about was really focused on this increased access to peers at school and increased aspect of being able to access specific interests. This is when kids start to say, you know, soccer is the sport that I really want to focus on. I'll get rid of the other things, but I'll really focus on my soccer friends and building these soccer skills. And so they may have specific interests that are narrowing, and we want to see opportunities for that. There's also some Illinois specific milestones, right? So those who have children or who work with this population usually know about like the Springfield trip, usually in 6th or 7th grade, or the Washington, D.C. trip, as well as cultural components, right? This is the year for a lot of 13th birthdays, which hold cultural significance for a lot of middle schoolers and their families. And what we saw was COVID really interrupted access to those opportunities. Zoom bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs were not a thing pre-COVID, but we found that those milestones with this age range were shifted to the virtual world or were changed to include less people, less access to peers, shorter time together, and again, time in this virtual space, which before really wasn't explored. The other component in terms of opportunities for development in middle school that we're aware of is middle school itself is a transition, because it's when children start to transition between classes. They don't have a home, like one teacher that's their home base and then go to music or go to PE. Rather, every day they're transitioning. And this is really about high school readiness. It's the readiness to be able to handle that high school schedule where you have different teachers for every class, but to give it in a middle school environment that allows for nurturing teachers to still kind of scaffold that skill building. And so we kind of have this interruption with COVID for middle school because it is a 3-year period, and COVID has been going on since 2020, right? Most middle schoolers had an interruption at some point, whether it was a transition to 6th grade, 7th grade, or 8th grade, including some form of Zoom school or hybrid, which just introduced more transition and less support during this transition time. It made this stage especially rocky when it came to executive functioning skills, like being able to handle that complex schedule, homework, attention in class. And I know we'll talk more about the impact on academic success later. But just in general, those 6th to 8th graders had an already tough transitional time be interrupted more by COVID.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about just the transition from middle school to high schoolers, and just the 2-year span, and just the significance of that transitional period that Ariel's talking about. And I'll focus for this panel more on the high school experience. So kind of piggybacking off Ariel, of course, high school, you know, is traditionally 4 years, and in similar ways, there's just, and I won't go too much into this, but there's just so many opportunities missed to socialize. And I especially have a lot of empathy for the freshmen, sophomores who, you know, are new to the school and, you know, weren't really able to join clubs or try out for the sports teams, the musicals, interact with people. Just some of these embedded social experiences were gone. And I think what I'm seeing just in terms of some of the skills that are lacking, and of course, you know, this isn't every child, this isn't every teenager. What I am seeing though, I think, is just struggling to communicate in person in regards to anxiety around how the interaction will go. So a lot of my teens have a lot of anticipatory anxiety about coming off as awkward, or that the interaction will be awkward. And I think in these last couple of years, where a lot of communication has been online, Zoom, social media, video games, we can kind of perfect our communication and tailor it in a way that the unpredictability of in-person interactions, we can't do that. So I've seen a lot of my teens kind of struggle to initiate plans. They'll kind of say, you know, like, my friends, we're all talking about getting together, but then, you know, when I ask how the weekend went, they didn't really do anything. So, you know, just thinking about how we can help, I think caregivers, parents, teachers, clinicians, I think if this lens does speak to the child in question, just this fear of initiating, or that it's going to be awkward and uncomfortable, kind of just normalizing that's just a part of a lot of our communication, even as adults, right? We all experience those awkward moments, and that, you know, doesn't mean that it's dangerous. It's just uncomfortable. And the more we do and lean into that, the easier the opportunities will get. And kind of, you know, lastly on the social skill aspect, I think, again, not all, but a lot of my teens I'm seeing kind of falling into what I call avoidance traps, where just avoiding can kind of become very habitual. And the more time goes by without in-person interactions, we kind of forget how that feels, right? We forget the positive feelings associated with that. And so from a parent caregiver perspective, it might look like they don't want to socialize or that they're not interested, but in fact, they often really do. It's just their comfort and social zones have shrunk, and there's likely a lot of anxiety and fear there. But I'm sure we'll circle back to this at some point.
Thank you, Jocelyn and Ariel. I think that you are giving a great perspective of like the social part that everyone in every age was struggling. But I will focus in the elementary school age children and the little ones that are between 5 and 11. And probably they were the most silently impacted during this pandemic, because like all the adults around, we were kind of surviving. We're unsure what was going on, and kind of they rely on family, peers, and of course school to develop so many skills, not only social skills, emotional skills, academic skills, and their whole world relies on these adults that are around them. So actually, while schools were transitioning to this learning system, you know, like online learning, and actually like peers were at their homes, they were just at home and relying on these parents that were trying to do most of the time the best that they could, but also going through a pandemic and not knowing how to explain and how to support them. Not because they couldn't or they didn't want it, because it's really hard to, when you are experiencing the same as uncertainty or even also anxiety or other things, to support and explain someone that is 5 or 6. So I think that that's a really important component. Like they were overseen, not because we didn't want to, it was because we were surviving, and it was really hard to focus and try to support them during this transition. So of course, also a lot of milestones, like these developmental and emotional milestones that need to be done during this period of time between 5 and 11 were kind of missed for so many kids. Not only about the social interactions that they're extremely important, so to build so many other skills later. And I think that right now, maybe the impact of whatever they suffer or experience is hard to even be planned or assess, and only time will give us a huge picture of what actually they experienced by this pandemic that happened to everyone. Also, I think that I want to point out that even it sounds like it was extremely traumatic in some sense, also it was some positive effects, just like there were more parenting children, kids that were spending more time together. The sibling bonds get stronger. There was a lot of technological literacy and some increase in other skills, that it was not only about these kids trying to survive. And yes, of course, for these ones that are 5 and 11, between 3 and 6, they are still confused between fantasy and it's a natural process, fantasy and reality. So I saw during that period with some of my clients that they were trying to figure out what the virus was. So making drawings, making some stories about how they feel or they think that this virus was, and putting eyes and setting some things was extremely useful also to deal with this anxiety of this new thing that is attacking us, is killing people, is killing, like we are afraid, we're at home, but I don't know even how it looks like. And it was really hard for the parents even to try to explain, like, it's a tiny thing, you have to wash your hands, and how many, and all the things that were changing constantly and were really, really hard to explain to someone that is still developing in so many ways.
No, that's really good. And you mentioned about it being uncomfortable. And one of the things for children that were already shy or introverted to begin, and then, having missed some of these age appropriate social development skills, what are ways that they might need additional support, or how you can help manage those missed opportunities that may have increased, that isolation for those children that were shyer?
I think a big piece is figuring out where, as caregivers, even as schools and teachers, we can start to scaffold some social experience. Meaning kind of support and provide opportunities for it. Now, of course, right, to provide opportunities for it means we have to have resources to do that, which can be the really struggling and difficult piece, and why we know that different communities were impacted by this at varying levels based on resources and institutions that were available to them or were not. I do think getting an idea of what your shy child's interests are, where they feel confident, and investing time into that can be really beneficial. There are Lego clubs now, there's imaginary game clubs now, chess, there's sports, and really just showing interest and giving them kind of a structured social opportunity. I think the other piece is we're all so much easier fatigued now. We all are getting overwhelmed by return to workplace, by going off to school, by having these extracurriculars. And so offering a time to decompress and relax if you have a shyer child is going to be important. So not over scheduling and allowing time at home. Introversion and shyness doesn't necessarily mean a social skill deficit, but if you are concerned about social anxiety or a skill deficit, there are some wonderful social skill groups around the Chicagoland area that can be a wonderful resource too.
Great, thank you. So we brought up remote learning and access to remote learning and that long-term effect on academic success. How has the increased use of digital technologies affected important skills such as executive functioning that you mentioned, problem solving, and self-sufficiency? And how does this translate into long-term academic success? Alejandra, let's start with the younger children.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, as I was sharing, it was not all about negative stuff. So in the case of these elementary school age children, they were seeing an increase of self-sufficiency, and of course this part of feeling that they were developing a lot of these technological skills by themselves. But it was tricky because, of course, even the kids were feeling that they were able to do a lot of things by themselves and connecting to this online learning experience with teachers and with other kind of peers. Their attention and concentration spans are really, really short. So they still relied on the parents, and parents were going through, also this transition, some of them going outside for work, or the ones that could switch to this learning or even working at home. And of course, the kids were trying to engage, and actually it seems like in some sort of work, but teachers were struggling. They were not sure even how to support this little children through this transition, and the children were trying to engage. So it was some winning for sure, but it was also a loss in some sense, because they were these kids, as I was sharing, they rely on peer school interaction, concrete experience, moving, doing things. And when you have a child that age between 5 and 11 sitting in the computer, that also we will explore later, it has an impact on that, because the screen time that is recommended to that period of age didn't match of the amount of time that teachers and actually institutions were asking the kids to engage. So we were exposing the kids to this screen time for educational purposes for sure, but at the same time, they are not, designed to interact or learn that way. They are designed between that ages because they are extremely concrete to move, to ask, to explore their world. And we were holding them because we have to inside home, not having a lot of these concrete experience that they need to explore and build learning experience. So it was good in some sense, but of course it had a huge impact. And of course the long-term impact of these kids that were missing these opportunities of experiencing their world by exploring, making mistakes, having some things outside will take a little time for sure.
I think building off of what you're talking about, right? We all have different forms of learning. So some children are tactile, engaged learners that need to be doing the action. And those children really missed out on opportunities to learn through science experiments, through hands-on learning, compared to the auditory visual learners that maybe did a little bit better gathering the information off of Zoom. In middle school, those high school readiness skills are really struggling right now. So I see a lot of issues completing homework and issues around self-esteem with grasping what's going on, because they may have been on one trajectory in elementary school, maybe even going to, oh, if I continue down this route, I'll get into high school math in 8th grade. And then COVID hit and understanding the information was just more difficult. Teachers had to use new methods of teaching, kids had to use new methods of learning. And so I do think that there's a bit of a academic material gap that we're seeing. Luckily, brain plasticity is amazing and resiliency at these ages are amazing, and kids are picking up on things again, but it is different than the expected route from pre-COVID. And I think there's some self-esteem that comes into that. And I think some of the fatigue of now going to school, being present, and then having to come home and do homework is really hard for middle schoolers, especially, to manage. Because they're used to elementary school where it was very little homework, Zoom school where really everything was homework because you were at home working. And now you have to go to school and come home and do work and manage it. And I'm seeing a lot of middle schoolers struggling with motivation and fatigue. And what parents can do, right, is I think communicate with teachers around that, but also just helping kids come up with a way to organize themselves and reward themselves after work's done, as well as having an adult present to help, even if that's, yes, maybe a paid tutor, but even just like an older sibling sitting with them or a babysitter being present with them while they try to focus on this work. I think technology skills boomed, which we got good and bad on both ends there. I think from an academic standpoint, we're going to see a lot of tech savvy people come out of this. But I know we'll talk about social media usage in a little bit, so I'll save comments on technology there. But I do think academic wise, we may see a higher trend of coding and engineers and some of that was easier to gain over online Zoom than maybe some of the classes that are more hands-on, like science, music, theater, even English in some ways.
Yeah, I appreciate both of your guys' remarks, and it's so cool to just hear some of the trajectories and talk in this way, because again, kind of, focusing on the high school experience, you get a sophomore, for example, whose last 2 years there, of high school has been kind of just shuffled around, hybrid, the year of more purely remote work. And I would agree with Ariel in terms of what I'm seeing. Kids kind of struggle with the executive functioning side of things, and primarily around homework. I'm seeing a lot of my teens struggle with just how to manage homework time in the home atmosphere. So how to, break up tasks, prioritize them, organize the various deadlines. And a lot of my clients are getting really stuck. And I think what teachers and educators did so well during COVID is just meet people where they're at, and we're so flexible and understanding. And now in a lot of schools, there's still that support and that flexibility. However, the expectations have resumed normal, if whatever we can call normal. Teens are expected to do more now, and I think having those couple years missed where they weren't really managing all these different tasks has been pretty remarkably challenging. And I'm going to echo what Ariel's saying in terms of like how we can help. I think teaching homework skills. So this is for students who, might not necessarily have a diagnosable executive functioning disorder, but just haven't had this practice. And also, right, maybe have some anxiety around the work as well, wanting to impress teachers. I'm really seeing just a lot of anxiety that teachers are upset. But I think what we can do is just try to teach these skills and, you know, work side by side. So, you know, you have a test on Wednesday, you know, four math sheets due tomorrow, a project in a couple weeks, you know, how should we break this up, and teaching that as a tangible skill. And I think teachers, parents, I've gotten involved as a therapist before, several times actually, just in these conversations with the teens support systems of how we can try to all together try to teach these skills. Agreed with Ariel and Alejandra, though. I think, you know, it's not all bad, it's not all distressing. And at the same time, I think we truly are seeing some of this spillover from an academic lens. But adolescents are resilient, and I've even seen in this last year just some progress with this too, just the more practice they've had.
No, that's great. And you mentioned social media. I know that's a big question on many parents and caregivers' minds. And so let's discuss, what are the positives and negatives you have seen in each age group in terms of the increased social media use, and what are some of the more concerning things that have come out? You know, we see the increase in social media bullying, you know, the addictive nature of social media. You know, I saw a question pop up about, you know, being on their phone too much. Let's kind of talk about some of those positives and negatives of social media use.
Yeah, I can start that one. Absolutely, and I'll try to be mindful of not going off on too many different directions. I think we can kind of all work together and circle back, because I think it's so complicated. And absolutely, social media, online platforms, especially during the height of the pandemic, had a lot of positive connecting benefits. And even now, right, research suggests it's not all bad. It's not a direct correlation to, right, all of these kind of psychiatric disorders. It's all very complicated. I think positives that I'm still seeing are just people who can communicate with their friends, maintain levels of socialization. With my teens, I've seen a lot of activism kind of collectively. A lot of teens, I think, are using social media to share opinions and feel connected with one another. Some supportive group stuff I'm seeing. I think some of my teens that play video games, I know that can also have a downside. In terms of the positive, though, that's an enjoyable activity. They're navigating teamwork, they're navigating losing respectively, winning respectively. So there are some pros, and, you know, of course, do you want to address some of the concerns? I think a lot about the social piece. So how social media and the social interactions, kind of circling back to that, are interconnected. I think with the gap from the last few years, kids and teens are kind of having a hard time move some of the relationships. And again, not everybody, but move the relationships in person. So whereas it might look like they're connecting, right? It looks like they're having conversations. They're actually, it's not as fulfilling. And so I think my biggest concern is just, how do we transition these in-person relationships to, or excuse me, these online relationships to an in-person format? And I think what we can kind of do is just check in with the teens and ask them, right? Like, how do you feel when you're DMing a friend versus how do you feel when you're socializing at school? Because I do see that again as well, like kids can come back from school and say, you know, I talked to somebody in class, or I saw someone in the hallway, and that feels really positive and connecting. And then, right, kind of spend the weekend scrolling and wanting to reach out, but kind of struggling to know how. And I think parents and caregivers, we can just check in and ask, right? Like, how is some of this feeling to you? What's the difference? And I think we might be surprised. I think when you really ask teens, you know, how do you feel 15 minutes on social media versus how do you feel 30 minutes in, an hour in, 2 hours, 3 hours? Many teens will tell you, like, I don't feel great. I'm bored, right? I'm feeling sad. And so just having those conversations of ways that we can try to problem solve that and set some limits together and try to promote more in-person activity. And I think, again, we can kind of circle back to maybe how some of this is interconnected. But a side note of things that I'm seeing is just teens using, and I think adults do this as well, using it as a tool to cope and procrastinate and avoid. So it's so easy for us and teens, especially, right, just to grab the phone and just mindlessly escape whatever distressing emotion we have. And although we can appreciate, right, they're trying to cope through that discomfort, we know that, you know, when they finally put the phone down, the same overwhelm is there, the same anxiety is there. So I think that's another concern, just social media as a tool to numb and avoid. And again, I think just conversations around that, bringing awareness into that can be helpful. And I think, whereas it's not going to work for everybody, but trying to collaborate together, teen and parent, of ways to try and to navigate some of this. Of course, not all situations are the same, but I'll pause because I think I should, and we can circle back as needed. I'm interested to hear what Alejandra and Ariel are thinking too.
Well, I do want to piggyback off of what you're saying about parent support, because when we saw this social media trend, and Alejandra, I'm sure you'll talk about this too, of now younger and younger are using Messenger Kids, they're using Discord for gaming, they're communicating online so much more, which can be beneficial in that it allowed kids to stay connected. And we didn't see as much of like the mindless scrolling and kind of maybe like TikTok and Instagram as we did direct messages with middle school and younger children. However, those platforms are made for a higher level of communication. You have to be able to read between the lines, and you have to catch when are you reading a tone that isn't there, right? There's a lot of social nuances that middle schoolers are just starting to develop, and they develop those social skills through interactions in real life, and then processing it with either an adult that was available for them in school, like a teacher, or coming home and saying, you know, so-and-so is picking on me at school. Well, how do I handle this? Or I had a lot of fun playing at recess with so-and-so. Can we invite them over? And really using that parent as a grounding base to explore and develop those skills. With social media usage for communication in middle school, the middle schoolers who were able to use it successfully had parental supervision around it. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean every time they sent a message, the parent had to be there looking at it, but had regular check-ins and conversations about, just like Jocelyn was saying, why are you using it? How does it feel to use it? Is there a way that we can make this more successful? I think, right, like Zoom parties and like finding games to connect with where there was a shared activity and it wasn't just, hi, how's your day? My day's good, how's yours? Was more successful. And then with video games, when it's a cooperative video game, we actually see, so while Minecraft, I think, has a lot of emotions attached to it because it is one of those games that a lot of middle schoolers seem to get really stuck on and somewhat, you know, have some addictive qualities to it. It is a game that we know can increase visual spatial processing abilities and cooperative communication. It's going to depend how your child interacts with the game though, because your child can go in and explode their friend's world and then get into arguments with their friends. And that could be a time where they need a parent to help them navigate that. But I do think that certain video games that are age appropriate and are not violent focused do have some positive connections, aspects to them that we saw during COVID as well. But again, I think it really goes back to a processing break with the caregiver. Too much freedom leads to miscommunication and difficulties with it. And so if the parent can be involved, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, completely agree with Ariel and Jocelyn. And actually my group age is even relies more in parents for sure. And of course, as Ariel was mentioning, kids are starting to have these Messenger Kids or this kind of interaction that are good if there's parents involved for sure. And as she mentioned, it involves some sort of developmental skills and actually communication skills as well. So most of the kids are at 5 or 6, they are still like learning to read, they're developing some skills that they will be really hard to set on in a chat. But during the pandemic, I think that it was that was better than nothing. Like a lot of parents were using the platforms like Zoom, these interactions about other friends, video games, and other stuff just to connect and to give some sort of social interaction with others. So it was not completely bad. And of course, the online learning platform that the teachers were developing, where they were trying to do this PE class while the kids were trying to dance or do things, or even us in trying to do therapy by Zoom with them during this time that was extremely challenging. It was better than nothing. Like just being isolated was not an option for this group of kids, because they really need to develop so many other skills to be connected with others. So it was better to talk to mom or to grandma or to anyone else. And actually it was a good thing, because made everyone else, since everyone was kind of isolated in their homes, like maybe grandma was living in another state, so they were connecting more often and seeing people and trying to do a different kind of connections. Even we're online, we're connections. So I want to rescue that part for sure. But also I think that since we're transitioning to this personal or kids are going back to school or this new normal, that is more a hybrid model. Of course, parents, I think more than kids are struggling with this screen time. Like CDC was like raising up a concern that kids were spending as much as 9 hours sometimes scrolling. In my age group, it will be less social media, but it will be more about maybe being exposed to certain news, or just like this babysitting style that parents, like, I know that we are overwhelmed and it's really hard to be around, and just giving that game that they can do it in the phone or in the iPad. So I think that more than actually the recommended amount of time that this group age should be exposed, between 5 and 11, could be maybe 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and of course supervised. So we're going through 2.5 hours to 9 hours. So that's a lot. But more than that is that all the things that these kids are missing, like these experiences that they need to develop so many skills that their brain is still developing, like needs a lot of these emotional and actually physical interactions. So while I'm scrolling or watching some, I don't know, TV show in my computer or in my TV, I'm missing like watching or walking with others, like playing with my neighbors, or like playing with my dog, or building something, or jumping in the rain. So I think that's the critical aspect of this amount of screen time that the kids are experiencing, that they're missing so much opportunities connecting or doing other stuff that are critical to their age between this period of time.
And actually, I could totally jump into, because we have a sneak peek preview of the questions. That's my biggest tip for parents that are struggling with kids who will not get off screen, which I know is Crystal's next question. So I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but what Alejandra is saying of what is missing. Kids do so much better when we tell them what they can do versus what they can't do. So saying, you're done with screen time, you're done with the tablet, give it to me, you're done, is telling them what not to do. But instead, if you have a child who is struggling with getting off of screens are screens, games, social media, they activate our reward pathways neurologically. They have a sensation to them that is immediately rewarding and gratifying. And think of how important that was for middle schoolers, young children, teens, adults, in a time where we did not have any control of what was going on. We were told not to leave our homes, not to communicate with people we love in person, not to hug. To be able to sit down on a device and have complete control of a game, of a world, or of talking to friends is going to activate that response system tenfold times. So what I recommend doing with that is for our kids, and I see it especially in middle schoolers, I think for elementary school age children, they still want to get out and do things. Middle schools are the ones who have learned how much fun video games are. And then I think, Jocelyn can talk more about teens and getting off social media as well. But for middle schoolers, my biggest thing is brainstorm as a family. What do you like to do other than video games? Invest in those toys, invest in those opportunities, write it down so there is a menu for your child to choose from, and then plan out transitions in a mindful way. Don't have it be transition from screen time, which is the highest preferred activity, to homework, to therapy, even to dinner time. I had a really successful moment of just the difference between screen time to playing fetch with the dog outside to dinner time. And going from a highly preferred activity to still a preferred activity that your child could pick off this menu of things they like to do is going to then help that transition. So it needs to be like a 3-part transition now.
No, that's really helpful. Does Alejandra or Jocelyn, do you have any additional tips or advice for parents to help counter some of these bad habits or that negative impact for your age groups?
Yeah, I think it can get really, really tricky for the high school aged people. And with that being said, I think, you know, depending on the relationship with your teen, depending on I think the teen's awareness of their social media use, I still would lean in kind of approaching it from a collaborative standpoint of just being like a gentle curiosity, right? Like, how is this going for you? What are you doing when you're on your phone for 8 hours? Like, what's the breakdown here? What is it that is meaningful? What is it that's not meaningful? And yes, some adolescents, you know, vary on the continuum, the spectrum of awareness and willingness to get off. So I don't think it's as simple as I'm describing. I know it's not, but starting collaborative, I think, matches the developmental age of the teens, especially, you know, we're talking about the 16, 17-year-olds who can drive and who are spending a lot of time out of the house. To Ariel's point, telling what they can't do, but also you're not taking their phone away because that's very difficult and we need it for safety, and they are probably doing schoolwork on their phones. It's almost unrealistic, right? So I think with teens, it's striking a balance between coming from and making authoritative decisions, right? Like, I think there is still some space for that in the house, kind of circling back to struggles with homework, right? Like, you might take the phone during homework hours to help with distraction and procrastination and give it back at a certain point, and you might agree on that with the teen, or you might just, right, kind of provide that as the expectation. So balance between that authoritative stance, and I think trying to collaborate and, you know, have the teens buy into doing some of this. And again, I know not every teen is going to have that buy-in. I would say though, and you know, I am impressed with the awareness. I really do feel like when you ask some of these teens, and it might not be as simple, but how are you feeling after, you know, 4 hours of scrolling? I've rarely heard a response that's, I'm great, everything's fine. Like, I'm really preferring this. I really do believe most adolescents want to be out. They want to be out engaging with their peers. It's a matter of not knowing how and just feeling really stuck. So trying to strike that balance between maybe being a bit more directive and looping them collaboratively. But I know it's very hard with adolescents.
With younger kids, I will say that first, parents need to be sure of the amount of time or screen time that they are willing to engage or give their kids. I like to follow the guidance that CDC or other maybe institutions can provide us. So we're like not something that is just family chosen, is more like the time that is recommended is 2.5 hours. So let's do it. Let's make it work. Parents need to be really aware of the boundary or what they are expecting for the kids before even asking or trying to do some things with them. And after that, I will say that anticipating, kind of explaining, having a conversation with your child and saying like, I know that we have been like connecting with the online learning and doing this or that. And actually by now we're going through less time. Let's plan to be, you know, having this screen time after dinner. Yes, no, and kind of, you know, having this meaningful conversation and explaining what it will mean, how it will feel, that it's okay to be angry, and it's okay that it will be hard, but kind of validating that this is something that will start happening in their lives. And after that, I will recommend having this visual routine or creating some with your kids, just like saying like after dinner and making a little drawing about dinner, and then what will happen, 2 hours of screen time, and having it in a place that the kid can see every single day. So in case that after dinner, we are confused. We don't know the amount of time. It will be hard to track. So go back to this drawing that you create with him or with them, and actually like you can reinforce the boundary that you already set. And after that, have some kind, I have seen with some parents, this struggle of 2 hours, but for kids, it's really hard to track time. So having any visual, like time tracking, it could be a sun clock, it could be a drawing or some sort that you are giving the kid, like the amount of time that you are expecting. What does it mean for him, 2 hours and a half? Because saying that and having a clock on your or watch, it's easier when you're an adult. When you are a kid, it's really, really hard to understand what my parents are expecting from me. And that actually helped through the transitions, because for kids that age, it's really hard to go through one transition to the other one, like to go to school, to do homework, to stop playing, to get to the, take a bath. So I have seen like this part of working or playing, making these transitions like really, really playful. Kind of, you have this like the screen time is over, so you have these two options to go to bed. We can jump as kangaroos, or we can, I don't know, like jump or hop like frogs. What you are going to choose? And kids are more open to that because it's a playful way, and they are not seeing that like, oh, it's screen time over, or it's time to do this or that. It's more like play with my mom, play with my dad, and they actually engage when they see you jumping and doing things. And the last one will be like just being patient, being consistent, expect some tantrums, and of course, kind of being connected with your kid. Because also I have seen this part of parents like really, really concerned about this screen time, taking the kids to the park and giving them other healthy options like playing with the dog, being around, or doing things outside that are extremely helpful. But also while the kid is in the playground, parents are in the cell phone. So like that is not matching what the kid are or what we are trying to teach the kid. I'm not saying that, of course, we should completely forget and forgive like our cell phones. Of course, is something that we need as an adults, but kind of being there for your kid. If you're telling like this is the outside time or is our connection time, like is really helpful that they see you connecting and not only scrolling on social media because they are playing in the playground, they're outside and they are doing stuff. So get connected with them and do things with them as well.
That's really great advice. I will take into consideration myself, as I often struggle with screen time withdrawal. So I know we're such a great discussion. I want to make sure that we get to the increased anxiety and depression in children, and we know that children have had a lot to process over the last few years, and that's resulted in a rise in anxiety and depression in even younger age groups, including the recent declaration of the children's mental health crisis. Can each of you talk just a little bit more about this, and what are ways that parents and caregivers can provide support for the children in their lives? Ariel, do you want to start?
Absolutely, yes. So I think this has really put anxiety and depression, especially on the map, on the forefront of people's mind. I also want to remind everyone that depression and anxiety in children through teens and adults really can also look like irritability and behavioral difficulties. And so just my whole soapbox, because I do work with a lot of children who have behavioral difficulties in the home and school, is just because your child is showing anger does not mean that is the only feeling going on, and to have some patience with that. Really what I recommend with families is this is an opportunity to open up about emotions in an appropriate way. Now, we never want our child to be our caregiver, right? So we want to protect them from large emotions. They should not feel the need to make us feel better as their caregiver. However, having real conversations about feelings and small everyday feelings. Anxiety isn't something that is just clinical anxiety and only these people feel it and all that, right? Like all of us probably felt a little nervous before joining the panel today. and having conversations, normalizing those feelings and exploring them. If you as a caregiver open up that conversation, your child will then, one, start to learn the language to express their feelings, and two, know that you're a safe person to talk to. And then you can kind of monitor, is it something that I can support them through, or do we need to take a step up in care and find a professional in the community who could be helpful? Normalize all feelings. Anger is not a bad feeling. Sadness is not a bad feeling. Anger tells us something feels unfair, which comes up a lot in middle school. Anger tells us something is unfair and you would like it to change. And so it's important to express it in an appropriate manner. And sadness is telling you that there's something too heavy, that you need help and you need people to come to you and give you support because something feels too heavy to carry on your own. And so they serve a function. I always say on an emotional level, you are always valid. On a behavioral level, we have a choice and we have responsibility. And so helping especially middle schoolers who want that independence, want that autonomy, to say, all your feelings are valid. Let's talk about the feelings and let's problem solve how you would like to feel better. That has the best possible consequence for you, and either helps you connect with friends, helps something feel more fair, helps just express the feeling. I recommend families start doing check-ins at the dinner time. Like, shared meals are really important, especially during this time, and doing highs and lows. What was one high of the day? What was one low of the day? When I do this kind of check-in with some clients, instead of saying good, bad, I say what was good and what was tough, because that reframe of this was a tough moment, we can then start to say, we can tie in resiliency there, we can tie in problem solving there. If something was tough because it was anxiety producing, we can reinforce that they still did it, which builds confidence. And so really being mindful of the knowledge that, or the language that we're using, so that way we're not passing down stigma for certain emotions, can be really important. And then the other piece is be aware of fatigue. Your kids are going to be tired, you're going to be tired, and communicating about emotions is difficult then. And I really recommend, especially in middle school, help your child come up with a self-care plan. So we talk about self-care a lot as a way to kind of cushion ourselves from world stress, and kids need it just as much as adults need it. Oftentimes I have parents have conversations with their middle schoolers around, what do you like doing? What brings you joy? And to come up with what's something you can do if you're feeling low and you're by yourself. What's something we can do as a family if you're feeling fatigued and need some need energy and you want to spend time together. And then what's one thing you can do to beat social isolation? Social isolation, we know, is directly correlated with depression. And so you want to be mindful if you see your child isolating more, that that's something we want to increase. So that's usually my tips and tricks for any kind of anxiety and depression that you're starting to notice in a child, to start there. And if it feels too big, reach out to community supports. The Family Institute has a free clinic currently. Be open to working with students. Our student trainees are amazing and they get so much supervision. You're basically getting 3 therapists in one, as well as kind of being aware of what community resources are out there. Maybe it's not a therapeutic social skills group, but maybe it's a Lego group that the kid really likes that will allow for social interactions to build up that confidence and decrease that anxiety.
I think just piggybacking, because I think, excuse me, all of those tips can apply to the high school age. And I think that was such rich and really important information. And so, if those things still don't seem to be moving the needle, I think, I get asked what is, typical adolescent behavior and what's depression. And of course, this is a blanket statement, but overall what we want to look at is how is their functioning in 3 realms. We want to look at how are they functioning at home, how are they functioning with peers, and how are they functioning at school. And again, I don't want to say this to feel pressure to make those assessments very specifically, but just at large, zoom the camera lens back. How are they functioning in these 3 areas? And if you have an inkling it's not going well, or that it's feeling like there's quite a bit of impairment issues in these areas, at that point, we would recommend a referral. So, you know, they could come in the office and we could do a more thorough assessment in those areas too. So yes, there's some behaviors that adolescents exhibit that can look like depression, but using the basis of functioning, I think from a parent lens can be helpful.
For sure, I think that in any group age, all of these tips will be extremely useful. And I was thinking of how parents or even clinicians can actually spot this part of anxiety, depression among any group age, but focusing in the elementary spot will be kind of like in any mental disorder, kind of you have to focus in the feeling, in the thoughts, and of course in the behavior. But with kids that are young, I think that we have to rely more on behavior because they are not great communicators yet. Like the brain is still developing and it will be really hard that a little kid will join, I don't know, their mom or dad or anyone else around and say like, I'm feeling this way or the other. So having that high expectation will be really, really hard. And also kind of what Ariel was saying, like sometimes angry kids or irritable kids or kids that are having a hard time sleeping or other kind of symptoms that could seem kind of easy or little ones or disconnected could be part of a huge part of a bigger picture of what is going on behind that. I will say that like we have to focus for sure in intensity and of course the frequency of these events. Like that's something I really work on when I receive cases or parents like, okay, this is happening, your kid is sad. Like how often this happen? Like if something that we have to be concerned or not, like the frequency and in the intensity of whatever your kid is experiencing. And just like Jocelyn said, like spotting and making these little assess and trusting who you are, like a parent. And you don't know, like, you know better than anyone around your kid what is going on, what could be happening, if that is normal or not normal. Because sometimes, yes, like we can assess. And of course we have like amazing tools. And I think that UCLA is developing at this brief COVID PTSD scale that will be extremely helpful in some point. So we can rely on that. But if you as a parent or as an adult that is around these kids are noticing that there are things that are not working, like the kid is not, maybe even in the basics, is sleeping well, is eating well, is having some sort of relationship in their life. Maybe we're like in online learning, but it's turning maybe their camera off and is not even talking or trying to communicate with anyone around the house or around other options that is in the community. So kind of assessing if your kid is going through this experience, if it's not really doing well in these aspects, maybe it's time to look for professional help rather than just feeling that it will pass along. And also, I know that is kind of obvious, but anxiety and depression sometimes, and most of the time, 50% of the time comes together. So if your kid is struggling with anxiety, it's also an option that he's struggling with depression on the other side, for sure.
Wow, this is such a great discussion. I really don't want to end it, but we are unfortunately out of time. I think just really great information. Thank you, Jocelyn, Alejandra, and Ariel. I do know that there were a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A section, and we are pulling those questions out, and we will work to get those answers and some of those resources out to you when we share the recording of this webinar. Also, in the meantime, you can visit us at family-institute.org, where we do have a lot of this information and resources are available on our website for you now, but we will get the answer to these questions and the recording out to you as soon as possible. So thank you all for joining, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.